And now please join Jason and Allison for the tragic tale Skyfall.
Imagine you are clinging to a twisted piece of aluminum framework, thousands of feet in the air.
Right in the middle of the worst thunderstorm Ohio has ever seen.
Exactly. Beneath your boots is absolutely nothing but a terrifying drop into the darkness. Welcome to our deep dive on transportation tragedies. I'm so glad you can join us today. I'm here with our resident expert, Allison, ready to unpack a truly unbelievable piece of history.
Hello to all of you listening, and thank you, Jason, for setting us up. I have been really looking forward to exploring this specific disaster because it is incredibly revealing.
So our mission today is to build a step-by-step timeline of the tragic destruction of the USS Shenandoah.
Right.
It was this, technological marvel, an absolute giant of the sky that was violently broken apart over Ohio in 1925.
Yeah, it really is a crazy story.
To me, this is a story of incredible hubris, a doomed mechanical compromise, and ultimately one of the most miraculous survival stories in all of aviation history.
It is. It really is a masterclass in what happens when rigid, bureaucratic schedules, overrule expert warnings.
Right.
It shows us the human cost of prioritizing public relations over the raw, unpredictable power of nature. Bureaucracies always seem to think they can dictate terms to a thunderstorm.
And they always lose.
Exactly. The atmosphere always proves them wrong.
Let's start by picturing this machine, because the sheer scale of it is, well, it's genuinely hard to comprehend today.
Oh, absolutely.
The Shenandoah, which had the naval designation ZR-1, was affectionately known by a phrase meaning daughter of the stars.
What a gorgeous name.
Right. And imagine an airship 680 feet long. That is more than 2 entire football fields in length, just hovering in the sky.
It is a massive footprint. She was assembled inside Hangar Number 1 in New Jersey, which was literally the only structure in America large enough to hold her at the time.
Wow. And it weighed somewhere between 36 and 40 tons. The skeleton was this huge, rigid aluminum structure, and it was entirely wrapped in gorgeous, silvery gray, rubberized fabric.
Yeah, and she had muscle, too.
Totally. It was powered by 5 300-horsepower engines mounted in these external gondolas that just hung below the main structure. It had a maximum speed of 70 miles per hour.
Which was incredibly fast for something that big back then.
Yeah, and it could fly for 5,000 miles without stopping. I mean, back in October of 1924, she actually made a 19-day transcontinental flight from the East Coast to the West Coast and back.
It was a massive propaganda tool for a whole new era of flight. She was the absolute pride of the United States military.
But she was an experiment, right?
She was a massive experiment. The Shenandoah was the world's first rigid airship to use non-flammable helium instead of highly combustible hydrogen.
Right, avoiding that whole fire risk.
Exactly. She held about 2.1 million cubic feet of helium inside 20 massive gas cells lined with animal tissue. But here is the critical issue. The fundamental flaw that set up this entire tragedy. We call it the helium problem.
Because helium was not something you could just go buy at a party store back in the 1920s.
Not at all. It was extraordinarily rare. It had to be extracted from natural gas, making it an incredibly expensive strategic military resource.
Right.
And the United States practically had a monopoly on it. Inflating the Shenandoah essentially consumed the entire national reserve of the gas.
The whole reserve on one ship.
Yes. Because of that extreme scarcity, the Navy was aggressively obsessive about not losing a single drop of it.
Which brings up the compromise that I cannot wrap my head around. Looking through our sources, it reminds me of putting a cork in a boiling kettle and just hoping the metal doesn't burst.
That is exactly what it was like.
How could anyone justify deliberately sabotaging their own ship's pressure system on a $2 million flying fortress?
Well, it comes down to weight limits and leakage. The ship's commanding officer, Commander Zachary Lansdowne, was explicitly ordered to remove 10 of the ship's 18 automatic gas valves.
10 of them. Just gone.
Just removed. You see, the physics of lighter-than-air flight are pretty unforgiving. As a ship goes higher into the atmosphere, the surrounding air pressure drops.
Okay.
Boyle's law tells us that when outside pressure drops, the gas inside those cells expands.
So the balloon basically inflates even more as it goes up.
Precisely. And those automatic valves existed to vent that expanding helium outward, which prevented the cells from bursting.
Right.
By removing 10 of them, Lansdowne eliminated several hundred pounds of mechanical weight and stopped precious helium from leaking out during normal daily flights.
But I mean, it created a fatal bottleneck.
A completely fatal limitation. The ship was now mathematically limited to a safe climb rate of just 400 feet per 60 seconds.
Only 400 feet.
Yeah. With only 8 valves left, the ship could not vent the gas fast enough if it got pushed upward any faster than that. The expanding gas would simply overexpand and burst the internal cells.
Pressing right against that aluminum skeleton.
Exactly.
That is just terrifying. Now, Lansdowne was known as a realist. He was an Ohio native, right?
Yes, he was.
And one of the Navy's absolute most experienced airship officers. I mean, he piloted that transcontinental crossing we mentioned earlier. He understood this science better than almost anyone.
So he absolutely had to know the ship was vulnerable.
And knowing that makes the Navy's next demand so much worse.
Fast forward to the late summer of 1925. The Navy decides they want to show off their prized airship on a 6-day Midwest publicity tour.
Of course they do.
They want to fly over 40 cities. They want to visit multiple state fairs, including a huge showcase at the Ohio State Fair. They wanted the public to look up and see American military dominance.
But Lansdowne pushes back, doesn't he?
He tries. Because he grew up in Ohio, he knew the Great Lakes weather patterns perfectly. On June 15th, he formally requested, in writing, to delay the flight.
Wow. In writing.
Yes. He explicitly warned his superiors about the violent, unpredictable thunderstorms that rake across Ohio in the late summer. He practically begged them to wait until September was over.
And the bureaucracy just says no. The schedule is the schedule.
The Navy overruled him completely. The Shenandoah would fly as ordered, simply for the sake of the publicity tour.
His own granddaughter later recalled her family's memory of the day the airship departed. It was September 2nd, late afternoon. Lansdowne absolutely knew what he was flying into.
Yeah.
But he went anyway. They departed Lakehurst with 41 crew members and 2 passengers, making 43 men total on board. They successfully crossed the Allegheny Mountains, flying straight into the exact turbulent system Lansdowne had warned them about.
By the early morning hours of September 3rd, they are approaching Noble County, Ohio. The storms are waiting for them.
Here we go.
At 3:30 in the morning, the navigator, Lieutenant Commander Charles Rosendahl, comes on duty. He looks out into the darkness and says, quote, "This looks like a nasty one, sir."
And Lansdowne is already pacing.
Right. The airship is getting incredibly difficult to keep steady. The atmospheric currents are starting to just toss this huge vessel around.
Wait, if he sees this storm right there, why doesn't he just steer away? Like, why not turn south toward clearer skies?
He definitely considers it. He tries to alter their course slightly to skirt the worst of it, but he is feeling the immense crushing pressure of that Navy schedule.
Oh, right.
He knows they are expected at the state fair. He does not want to lose time or look like he is retreating. So instead of turning south to absolute safety, he makes the fateful decision to press forward into the turbulent weather.
And things deteriorate fast. By 4:30 in the morning, the physical toll on the ship is becoming a nightmare.
It's awful.
There is a chilling account from a crewman named Masters. He was relieved of duty at the wheel and started making his way along the interior walkway toward the bunkroom. He saw the interior framework twisting so violently that the silver skin of the airship was alternately tight as a drum and then wrinkling up like a twisted sausage.
Oh my gosh.
Down in the keel, crew members were literally wrestling with heavy fuel drums that had snapped their cables, trying to stop them from rolling into the delicate aluminum struts.
Add to that the sheer terror in the engine gondolas. Aviation machinist's mate Ralph Jones was sitting in engine gondola number 3.
Which was completely exposed.
Completely. These were isolated little aluminum pods hanging below the main hull on exposed metal struts. Jones is getting jolted around in the pitch black, terrified that a vibrating fuel line is going to rupture.
And just start a massive fire right there in his pod.
Exactly. The crew was terrifyingly vulnerable.
Which brings us to the physics of the breakup. Between 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning, the storm takes total control. The Shenandoah gets caught in a massive updraft of warm air. The rising gale grabs the massive ship and pushes it straight upward at a rate exceeding 1,000 feet per 60 seconds. Remember that fatal valve limit?
400 feet.
Right. The 8 remaining valves could only handle an ascent of 400 feet per 60 seconds. They are climbing more than twice as fast as the ship can survive.
It's catastrophic.
The ship is violently pushed up to over 6,000 feet. The ascent slows briefly, but then the ship drops like a stone. Halfway to the ground, she gets slammed by another updraft and begins to rocket upward again.
Then she plunges once more. On the third violent ascent, a turbulent side gale strikes the hull, physically twisting the entire massive framework.
And inside those 20 gas cells, the helium is expanding way too rapidly.
Yeah, the remaining valves cannot vent the gas fast enough. The crew can hear the aluminum framework popping and shearing all around them.
Oh, wow.
The overexpanded helium cells are pressing outward against the rigid metal structure with enormous, unstoppable force.
So you have expanding gas pushing outward and a violent atmospheric gale twisting the metal inward. At what point does the machine just shatter?
At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, the entire hull snaps in two at frame 125.
Which is where?
That is roughly 220 feet from the front of the ship. The helium cells rupture, and the airship essentially explodes from the inside out, splits into 3 distinct pieces.
The immediate casualties happen almost instantly. The main control car, which was suspended below the forward section by cables and steadying struts, separates from the ship and plummets to the earth.
Just falls straight down.
Yeah. Commander Lansdowne, the man who had predicted this exact scenario, had refused to leave his post during the crisis. He and 8 other men are killed upon impact when the car crashes onto a farm.
But there is one miraculous escape from that specific control car. Lieutenant Joseph B. Anderson. He gave an incredible account to the New York Times a couple of days later.
Oh, the catwalk jump. That is unbelievable. Tell him about that.
It is like something out of an action movie. Anderson said the whole ship was full of groans and awful noises, and then came the crash as the aluminum snapped. He had just stepped out of the control car and was climbing the ladder to the upper walkway. I reached the upper platform at the exact moment the control car broke loose and dropped straight down into the darkness.
Wait, really?
Yes. He survived by straddling the narrow walkway over a gaping, empty hole in the hull where the car had been, clinging to twisted aluminum with absolutely nothing beneath him. He just hung there until other survivors pulled him up.
That is just staggering luck.
Seriously.
But the tragedy wasn't over. 2 of those externally mounted engine cars shear away from the disintegrating hull and fall. 4 mechanics inside those isolated pods are killed on impact.
Awful.
When the struts gave way, they simply fell with no escape route. On top of that, 2 additional crew members tragically slip and fall to their deaths through gaps that ripped open in the main framework.
So the ship is broken into 3 main sections.
Yep.
But surprisingly, the pieces don't just drop like stones.
Right, it's like a sinking ocean liner that takes nearly an hour to reach the bottom, but in the sky. The Shenandoah takes almost an hour to reach the ground.
That's agonizing.
The massive rear section, which is over 400 feet long, sinks rapidly, but is still supported by intact helium cells. It acts almost like a clumsy parachute, carrying 18 men safely down to the Gamery farm.
One of the survivors from that rear section, Lieutenant Richardson, crawled out of the wreckage, studied the breeze, and said very matter-of-factly, quote, "It must have blown south. Poor devils, I hope they got off as well as we did."
Yeah.
He then just started walking toward where he knew the control car had crashed, fully aware of what he would find. A smaller central section also crash-landed separately with 4 survivors.
But it is the story of the front section that really defines the legacy of this disaster. Aviation historians call it the most extraordinary survival story in the history of lighter-than-air flight.
Totally agree.
When the ship broke apart, the front section was about 200 feet long. Since the immensely heavy control car had just fallen off, this broken front fragment became massively buoyant.
It loses all that weight and just shoots upward like a rocket. It rockets to roughly 8,000 feet in the air.
Unbelievable.
7 men are trapped inside this tumbling fragment, including Navigator Rosendahl and Lieutenant Anderson, who had just pulled himself up from the catwalk.
So Rosendahl essentially finds himself commanding a giant, uncontrollable, jury-rigged balloon in the middle of a thunderstorm. He has 0 engines. He has 0 steering. He has no landing gear.
Nothing.
7 men are looking at him, relying entirely on his next move to keep them alive.
It is a terrifying leadership test. But Rosendahl's strategy is brilliant. He studies the bulging gas cells above them in the framework. He realizes that each one is attached independently and can be controlled separately by hand valving. He orders the men to start manually releasing helium from the remaining cells. But the timing has to be perfectly precise. If they vent the gas too fast, the section loses buoyancy and plummets to the ground.
Right.
If they vent it too slowly, they stay trapped in the violent atmospheric currents until they freeze or crash.
And while Rosendahl is managing the valves, Anderson and the chief rigger start grabbing heavy chunks of twisted metal, wrenching them loose from the frame and tying them to dangling ropes.
Yeah.
They are creating improvised anchors. They were literally tossing out metal chunks to try to snag the earth.
Exactly. By about 10 minutes past 6, Rosendahl watches the hand valving take effect. The skin of the gas cells becomes wrinkled as the helium escapes. The 200-foot fragment slowly, agonizingly, settles toward a farm in Sharon Township, several miles south of the other crash sites.
And they actually make it.
Yes. As it hovers over the ground, a local farmer named Ernest Nichols grabs the dangling ropes and ties them to a tree. All 7 men crawl out of the wreckage alive. The official court of inquiry later commended Rosendahl specifically for sailing a broken fragment of a ship down from 8,000 feet.
The contrast of what happens on the ground after the crashes is really striking, and it says a lot about human nature.
It really does.
You have a local farmer named Andy Gamery. The control car and the massive rear section crash directly onto his land, completely ruining his crops for the year. But instead of panicking about his livelihood, he respectfully wraps the dead bodies in blankets, saddles his horse, and rides all the way to town to summon help.
That reverence is completely at odds with what happens next. Within 5 hours of the crash, more than 1,000 spectators and looters descend upon the Ohio farm fields.
1,000 people.
What followed was one of the most shameful episodes in American disaster response. The crowd completely strips the wreckage of anything they can carry away.
They were taking souvenirs from a mass casualty site.
Worse than souvenirs. They stole critical items, including the ship's logbook and barograph,
Oh, come on.
pieces of equipment that federal investigators desperately needed to understand the exact atmospheric conditions of the crash. They even ripped away the undamaged silt gas cells, which were worth thousands of dollars each, ripping them right off the framework to make dresses and shirts before armed military personnel arrived.
The situation got so chaotic that the FBI and 40 Ohio National Guardsmen had to step in. In the following weeks, federal agents actually conducted door-to-door confiscation sweeps across the county, recovering 4 truckloads of stolen items.
It's just wild.
For decades afterward, families in Noble County kept pieces of the Shenandoah hidden in their attics, terrified the government might come knocking.
The investigation and the military fallout from this disaster were intense. The court of inquiry officially concluded the disaster was caused by catastrophic structural failure resulting from violent updrafts.
Right.
They called the removal of the 10 automatic gas valves an error of judgment approved by expert officers, but stopped short of calling it criminal negligence. They did, however, highly praise the crew's bravery.
Of course, Brigadier General Billy Mitchell of the Army used the tragedy to publicly accuse the Navy and War Department of incompetency. We are not going to take sides on his politics, but Mitchell's outspoken accusations led directly to his famous court-martial, where he was convicted of insubordination and suspended from service. The whole disaster became a massive public spectacle.
But the physical legacy of the Shenandoah rippled through the entire military. It forced sweeping changes in airship design. Stronger hulls, control cars built directly into the keel instead of suspended by cables, and vastly improved weather forecasting.
Yeah.
The Navy did eventually build 2 more rigid airships, the Akron and the Macon, but tragically, both of those were also destroyed in severe storms in the 1930s. After those catastrophes, the United States abandoned the rigid airship program forever.
And there is a really eerie historical thread regarding the survivors. Charles Rosendahl, the navigator who sailed that front fragment to safety, went on to command other airships. In May 1937, he was the commanding officer at Lakehurst when the Hindenburg exploded.
Which is just surreal.
Another Shenandoah survivor, Frederick J. Tobin, actually commanded the Navy landing party that day and directed the rescue efforts. The age of the rigid airship essentially began with the Shenandoah, and it ended with the Hindenburg. And the men who survived the Daughter of the Stars were standing right there to witness the final tragedy.
It gives you chills. But back in Noble County, Ohio, this disaster is absolutely not forgotten. The local school district named its schools after the Shenandoah.
Really?
Yeah. And you have local historians like Teresa and the late Brian Rayner who dedicated their lives to preserving the artifacts. Brian built a dedicated museum inside a refurbished camper trailer.
Oh, that's awesome.
He was so dedicated that he was actually late for his own surprise 50th birthday party because he was stuck at an auction furiously bidding on a 6-foot section of the aluminum framework.
I love that.
He won the bid, and that relic is on display today. A century later, residents there still wear the disaster as a badge of local identity.
When you look back at all of the engineering, the politics, and the physics, the cruelest truth of the Shenandoah story is Commander Lansdowne himself.
Yeah.
Here was a brilliant, dedicated commander who looked at the maps and saw the exact danger ahead. He formally warned his superiors about the violent late summer weather system that would eventually take his life.
Right.
But because a rigid schedule demanded a publicity tour, and because an absolute obsession with saving helium overruled simple atmospheric science, he was sent straight into a storm. And when the structural failure shattered his beautiful ship, he perished right at his post.
It forces us to ask a really difficult question about the human cost of technological arrogance. We build these massive, awe-inspiring machines and convinced ourselves we have conquered the elements. But the Shenandoah reminds us that gravity and the atmosphere do not care about military schedules or propaganda or publicity tours. The sky always eventually claims those who ignore its warnings. Today, we take a solemn moment to honor the 14 crew members who perished over the Ohio farmland on September 3rd, 1925, men who did their duty in the face of impossible odds. Thanks for listening and hope to see you next episode.